My dear, marvelous, wonderful scholars, wherever you are, whenever you are, across this vast, wonderful omniverse, welcome all of you back here to the study. Hello there, hello there, hello there. How are you all doing? How are you all doing, my dear scholars? Oh my goodness, I'm getting tongue-tied already. For some reason, for some reason, my lips are really ticklish tonight. Every time I talk, it feels. Oh, there we are. There we are. For some reason, oh my goodness gracious, I don't know why we had a. I think we had an error or something. Oh, that's weird. Hmm. That is very strange, my dear scholars. I think I had a network error on my end on some reconnection problems. Oh dear. Oh dear. The study seems to be having some problems. Um. Oh my goodness gracious. Well, I'll just keep talking until it comes back. I'm offline. Oh dear, dear. Hold on. Hello there, my dear scholars. Can you see me? Hello. Can you see me all right? Or am I still offline? Am I still offline? I can't tell. Can't tell on my end. Oh dear. This is not. Oh no. Oh no, this is not good. This is not good. Oh dear. I might have to cancel the stream tonight. There's something going on here. Hold on, I'm gonna try. Okay. Can everyone hear me? Is it still? Am I still live? Am I live at all? Hmm, am I live? Hello? Oh, there I am. Okay. Oh, oh, there am I. Can you all hear me, my dear scholars? I I think I know what it was too. I think I know what it was. So, my dear scholars, as anyone technically can know about these sort of things, when one works with a computer, even an omniversal computer like this one, I'm just doing a little bit of work here. Um, what apparently happened, I think, I'm guessing here, is this streaming device of mine had been telling me to restart it for one of my antivirus scanners. I think it started to scan the network connection that I had and cut it off from the rest of the machine. Oh dear. Yeah, I think that's what it was. I think that's what it was. Hold on, let me take sure. I just gotta. Oh no. Anyway, how are all of you, my dear scholars? How are all of you? Oh, wait. We got a bit of scruff here just before the stream we're doing. Yulia 20, I am doing better than you. Oh, come on! Well, it's true. Firefly reloaded and through the commercials. Okay. Thank you, Firefly. Thank you all for your loyalty and sticking around. I'm so, so sorry. Oh, dear me. Oh, dear me. Union 20, no apologies. I have to make apologies. I'm gonna have to make this into a special video for the thing. Um, I wonder if I can get away with using that. Anyway, um, okay. So how do I go along with this? That whole bit's gonna be lost for the abyss. I don't know how long. The episode where Matsu deals with Scruff. Just start the story. Okay. Okay, well, I haven't even introduced the story yet. How am I supposed to start the story? Okay, tonight, my dear scholars, we're going to be continuing our read through of The Time Machine about one Victorian man's bundles bungles through time. I can't even talk right now. This has been this is so silly. Uh, so last time we left our hero, well, hero in quotation marks. He discovered the Morlocks. He met the Eloi. The Eloi are tiny people who, androgynous people apparently, who are being eaten by the Morlocks, and they're all descendants of mankind apparently. He's run off with Weena, one of the Eloi, and he's trying to find a safe place for them to stay. He's heading towards this palace area. Oh gosh, this is just this has been a okay. So my dear scholars, shall we begin reading? Oh, I know the answer. Let's just start reading because otherwise, while we can. So then, my dear scholars, sit back, relax, have a hot or cold beverage of your liking, dim the lights if possible, and let us continue our reading of The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. Excuse me. Oh my goodness, I got coughs in today. Chapter 8. I found the palace of green porcelain when we approached it about noon, deserted and falling into ruin. Only ragged vestiges of glass remained in its windows, and great sheets of the green facing had fallen away from the corroded metallic framework. It lay very high upon a turfy down and looking north-eastward before I entered it. I was surprised to see a large estuary, or even creek, where I judged Wadesworth and Battersea must once have been. I thought then, though I never followed up the thought, of what might have happened, or might be happening, to the living things in the sea. The material of the palace proved on examination to be indeed porcelain, and along the face of it I saw an inscription in some unknown character. I thought rather foolishly that Weena might help me to interpret this, but I only learned that the bare idea of writing had never entered her head. She always seemed to me, I fancy, more human than she was, perhaps because her affection was so human. Within the big valves of the door, which were open and broken, we found instead of the customary hall, a long gallery lit by many side windows. At the first glance, I was reminded of a museum. The tiled floor was thick with dust, and a remarkable array of miscellaneous objects were shrouded in the same grey covering. Then I perceived, standing strange and gaunt in the center of the hall, what was clearly the lower part of a huge skeleton. I recognized by the oblique feet that it was some extinct creature after the fashion of the megathermia. Thermin. I wonder what that is. Megathermin. Hold on, my dear scholars. Doing some investigation. If I can spell. So the Megathermian is a type of extinct ground sloth. Oh, the giant ground sloth, that sort of thing. Excuse me. The skull and the upper bones lay beside it in the thick dust, and in one place where rainwater had dropped through a leak in the roof, the thing itself had been worn away. Further in the gallery was the huge skeleton barrel of a brontosaurus, which, no, I'm not going to do that. I was going to say technically brontosaurus for a time didn't exist, but now they exist again. Maybe it's a long story, my dear scholars. My yeah, my museum hypothesis was confirmed. Going towards the side, I found what appeared to be sloping shelves, and clearing away the thick dust, I found the old familiar glass cases of our own time. But they must have been airtight to judge from the fair preservation of some of their contents. Clearly, we stood among the ruins of some latter-day South Kensington. Here apparently was the paleontological section, and a very splendid array of fossils it must have been, though the inevitable process of decay that had been staved off for a time, and had, through the extinction of bacteria and fungi, lost 99 hundredths of its force, was nevertheless with extreme sureness, if with extreme slowness, at work again upon all its treasures. Here and there I found traces of the little people in the shape of rare fossils broken to pieces or threaded in strings upon reeds. And the cases in some instances had been bodily removed, by the Morlocks, I judged. The place was very silent. The thick dust deadened our footsteps. Weena, who had been rolling a sea urchin down the sloping glass of a case, presently came, as I stared about me, and very quietly took my hand and stood beside me. Drink water. And at first I was so much surprised by this ancient monument of an intellectual age that I gave no thought to the possibilities it presented. Even my preoccupation about the time machine receded a little from my mind. To judge from the size of the place, this palace of green porcelain had a great deal more in it than a gallery of paleontology, possibly historical galleries. It might be even a library. To me, at least, in my present circumstances, these would be vastly more interesting than this spectacle of old-time geology and decay. Exploring, I found another short gallery running transversely to the first. This appeared to be devoted to minerals, and the sight of a block of sulfur set my mind running on gunpowder. But I could find no saltpeter. Indeed, no nitrates of any kind. Doubtless they had delinquished ages ago. Yet the sulfur hung in my mind and set up a train of thinking. As for the rest of the contents of the gallery, though on the whole they were the best preserved of all I saw, I had little interest. I am no specialist in mineralogy, and I went on down a very ruinous aisle running parallel to the first hall I had entered. Apparently this section had been devoted to natural history, but everything had long since passed out of recognition. A few shriveled and blackened vestiges of what had once been stuffed animals, dissected mummies in jars that had once held spirit. A brown dust of departed plant, a brown dust of departed plants. That was all. I was sorry for that, because I should have been glad to trace the patent readjustments by which the conquest of animated nature had been attained. Then we came to a gallery of simply colossal proportions, but singularly ill-lit. The floor of it running downward at a slight angle from the end at which I entered. At intervals, white globes hung from the ceiling, many of them cracked and smashed, which suggested that originally the place had been artificially lit. Here I was more in my element, for rising on either side of me were the huge bulks of big machines, all greatly corroded and many broken down, but some fairly complete. You know I have a certain weakness for mechanism, and I was inclined to linger among these. The more so as for the most part they had the interest of puzzles, and I could make only the vaguest guesses at what they were. I fancied that if I could solve their puzzles, I should find myself in possession of powers that might be of use against the Morlocks. Excuse me. Yeah, give me a second, my dear scholars. I don't think my checking, just checking. Okay, I'm gonna get just 1 second. There we are. Anyway, back to what we were saying. Suddenly, Weena came very close to my side, so suddenly that she startled me. Had it not been for her, I do not think I should have noticed that the floor of the gallery sloped at all. The end I had come in at was quite above ground, and was lit by rare slit-like windows. As you went down the length, the ground came up against these windows, until at last there was a pit, like the area of a London house before each, and only a narrow line of daylight at the top. I went slowly along, puzzling about the machines, and had been too intent upon them to notice the gradual diminution of the light, until Weena's increasing apprehensions drew my attention. Then I saw that the gallery ran down at last into a thick darkness. I hesitated, and then, as I looked round me, I saw that the dust was less abundant, and its surface less even. Further away towards the dimness, it appeared to be broken by a number of small, narrow footprints. My sense of the immediate presence of the Morlocks revived at that. I felt that I was wasting my time in the academic examination of machinery. I called to mind that it was already far advanced in the afternoon, and that I had still no weapon, no refuge, and no means of making a fire. And then, down in the remote blackness of the gallery, I heard a peculiar pattering, and the same odd noises I had heard down the well. I took Weena's hand. Then, struck with a sudden idea, I left her, and turned to a machine from which projected a lever not unlike those in a signal box. Clambering upon the stand and grasping this lever in my hands, I put all my weight upon it sideways. Suddenly, Weena, deserted in the central aisle, began to whimper. I had judged the strength of the lever pretty correctly, for it snapped after a minute's strain, and I rejoined her with a mace in my hand, more than sufficient, I judged, for any Morlock skull I might encounter. And I longed very much to kill a Morlock or so. Very inhuman, you may think, to want to go killing one's own descendants, but it was impossible somehow to feel any humanity in the things. You know, I'm gonna put this idea in your heads, my dear scholars. And there have been a lot of sequels and follow-ups written about the time machine, but I don't think they've ever explored the idea that the time traveler, for all we know, might be incorrect on certain aspects of the humanity and unhumanity of these characters he's viewing. Because, in a sense, we only have his word to what's going on. And, ironically enough, an interesting angle to think about, because of H.G. Wells writing this as a book and his own viewpoints on humanity and all that, is we are seeing the biased viewpoint of someone from Victorian England. Victorian or Edwardian England. Now, does that mean the Morlocks are nice? No, obviously not. They're cannibals. That's not exactly Well, even that is. Well, no, they're cannibals. They're not exactly the nicest people around. But he is judging this era by his central mores. And as he says, he counts the Eloi more as being human than the Morlocks because the Eloi, for all the way they act, look more human to him. So, in thinking this, we are heavily viewing someone with a bias towards a culture because of the visual similarities they have to them. We really don't know much about the Morlocks and what they're like other than two facts. One, they operate machinery underground. Well, three facts. One, they operate machinery underground. Two, they essentially are breeding the Eloi, giving them goods, giving them their clothes, giving them their shoes, giving them everything. And three, they feed on the Eloi like cattle, like we eat cattle. Um, but it does make it interesting because, for instance, I'm sorry to interrupt this, but for instance, the time traveler theorizes that the Morlocks operate the machinery by pure instinct and tradition just passed on. They're doing it by instinct. They're not actually doing it, which, in my opinion, feels odd because machinery that advanced should take a little bit more than instinct to operate. But again, it feels often like reading this that at times the time traveler is letting his personal biases and viewpoints color what he is experiencing. That's just my thoughts. You might have other opinions, but that's the interesting thing to think about as we go through this. He is not to say Weena's a bad person or the Eloi are bad persons, but he is siding with them mainly because to him they seem more similar to him than the Morlocks seem to him. That line just made that come back into my thought. Only my disinclination to leave Weena and a persuasion that if I began to slake my thirst for murder, my time machine might suffer, restrained me from going straight down the gallery and killing the brutes I heard. Well, Mace in one hand and Weena in the other, I went out of that gallery and into another and still larger one, which at the first glance reminded me of a military chapel hung with tattered flags. The brown and charred rags that hung from the sides of it, I presently recognized as the decaying vestiges of books. Oh my goodness! Oh, those poor books. Well, then again, I suppose no one's taking care of the books, although you would think by that point the material would last a little longer. They had long since dropped to pieces. Oh, this is like a horror story. And every semblance of print had left them. But here and there were warped boards and cracked metallic clasps that told the tale well enough. Had I been a literary man, I might, perhaps, have moralized upon the futility of all ambition. But as it was, the thing that struck me with keenest force was the enormous waste of labor to which this somber wilderness of rotting paper testified. At the time, I will confess that I thought chiefly of the philosophical transactions and my own 17 papers upon physical optics. Then, going up a broad staircase, we came to what may once have been a gallery of technical chemistry. And here I had not a little hope of useful discoveries, except at one end, where the roof had collapsed. This gallery was well preserved, and I went eagerly to every unbroken case. And at last, in one of the really airtight cases, I found a box of matches. Very eagerly I tried them. They were perfectly good. Well, isn't that convenient? They were not even damp. I turned to Weena. Dance! I cried to her in her own tongue, for now I had a weapon indeed against the horrible creatures we feared. And so, in that derelict museum upon the thick, soft carpeting of dust, to Weena's huge delight, I solemnly performed a kind of composite dance, whistling the Land of the Leal as cheerfully as I could. In part, it was a modern can-can, in part a step dance, in part a skirt dance, so far as my tailcoat permitted, and in part original, for I am naturally inventive, as you know. Firefly, I feel like he's majorly underestimating what time does to things. Yeah, and it is a thing that happens, I think, very commonly in in many worlds upon the Omniverse, is people have a tendency to have a difficulty in imagining scope and scale. Something that immense amount of time, that immense amount of space, is beyond what many people can comprehend or at least imagine. So for him, he is, like you said, he is underestimating how far and how long time plays upon objects. The very idea, in fact, that there's almost nothing left of his present day scope, no cities, nothing, is already something that he really that it seems to not be in his mind, or at least surprises him when it really shouldn't. Now I shall I now yeah. Now I still think that for this box of matches to have escaped the wear of time for immemorial years was a most strange. As for me, it was a most fortunate thing. Yet oddly enough, I found it a far unlikelier substance, and that was camphor. I found a far unlikelier substance, and that was camphor. I found it in a sealed jar that by chance, I suppose, had been really hermetically sealed. I fancied at first that it was paraffin wax, and smashed the glass accordingly. But the odor of camphor was unmistakable. In the universal decay this volatile substance had chanced to survive, perhaps through many thousands of centuries. It reminded me of a sepia painting I had once seen done from the ink of a fossil belemnite that must have perished and become fossilized millions of years ago. By the way, this is a true fact. Back during the Victorian era, they did used to powder up fossils and mummified humans to make certain pigments, which became very popular in paintings. It's not exactly the most pleasant idea when it comes to artistry. I was about to throw it away, but I remembered that it was inflammable and burned with a good, bright flame. Was in fact an excellent candle, and I put it in my pocket. I found no explosives, however, nor any means of breaking down the bronze door. As yet, my iron crowbar was the most helpful thing I had chanced upon. Nevertheless, I left that gallery greatly elated. I cannot tell you all the story of that long afternoon. It would require a great effort of memory to recall my explorations in at all the proper order. I remember a long gallery of rustling stands of arms, and how I hesitated between my crowbar and a hatchet or a sword. I could not carry both, however, and my bar of iron promised best against the bronze gates. There were numbers of guns, pistols, and rifles. Julian 20, horrifying. Yes, it was horrifying. The most were masses of rust, but many were of some new metal and still fairly sound. But any cartridges or powder they may once have been had rotted into dust. There's an interesting thought. This is the future. I wonder if there were like laser guns or ray guns there, and he passed them up simply because he couldn't find cartridges or even recognize them as weapons. Wouldn't that have been interesting? Excuse me. One corner I saw was charred and shattered, perhaps I thought by an explosion among the specimens. In another place was a vast array of idols. Polynesian, Mexican, Grecian, Phoenician, every country on earth, I should think. And here, yielding to an irresistible impulse, I wrote my name upon the nose of a Stetite monster from South America that particularly took my fancy. As the evening drew on, my interest waned. I went through gallery after gallery, dusty, silent, often ruinous. The exhibits sometimes more mere heaps of rust and lignite, sometimes fresher. In one place I suddenly found myself near the model of a tin mine, and then by the merest accident I discovered, in an airtight case, two dynamite cartridges. I shouted, "Eureka!" and smashed the case with joy. Then came a doubt. I hesitated. Then, selecting a little side gallery, I made my essay. I never felt such a disappointment as I did in waiting 5, 10, 15 minutes for an explosion that never came. Of course, the things were dummies, and I might have guessed from their presence. I really believe that had they not been so, I should have rushed off incontinently and blown Sphinx bronze doors, and as it proved, my chances of finding the time machine altogether into non-existence. It was after that, I think, that we came to a little open court within the palace. It was turfed, and had 3 fruit trees. So we rested and refreshed ourselves. Towards sunset I began to consider our position. Night was creeping upon us, and my inaccessible hiding place had still to be found. But that troubled me very little now. I had in my possession a thing that was perhaps the best of all defenses against the Morlocks. I had matches. I had the camphor in my pocket too, if a blaze was needed. It seemed to me that the best thing we could do would be to pass the night in the open, protected by a fire. In the morning there was the getting of the time machine. Towards that, as yet, I had only my iron mace. But now, with my growing knowledge, I felt very differently towards those bronze doors. Up to this I had refrained from forcing them, largely because of the mystery on the other side. They had never impressed me as being very strong, and I hoped to find my bar of iron not altogether inadequate for the work. So it seems like our hero has found his way into the bronze doors. Um, what's interesting is the museum does figure into several of the movie versions. It is in the, I think it's in a form of in the 1960 version, and in a form in the 2000, well, what year was it? 2002 version of the film. And they add an extra bit in both those, which is in both those versions, the time traveler finds a means to learn about how the Morlocks in the Alloy came. Um, in the 1960 version, he finds a group of tops that, when spun, speak and give out the history of how the Alloy and the Morlocks came to be, which is exactly the way that the time traveler theorizes, which is the wealthy stayed above, they forced all the laborers below, the laborers essentially evolved into the Morlocks. The wealthy evolved into the Malloy, and that's how it came to be. In the 2002 version, it's done through a hologram that still exists in the museum, which tells and explains how. Maybe I shouldn't spoil it, but it explains this essentially the same thing, but with a different starting point. If I forgot actually, the 1960 version does give a starting point of why it happened, which plays upon many of the fears in the 1960s. Uh, but in the novel, as you can see, they never really go and explain it other than the time traveler's theories. And as I said, the time traveler could be mistaken. We really don't know because it is all based off his observations and his guesswork. Anyway, let's continue. Chapter 9. We emerged from the palace while the sun was still in part above the horizon. I was determined to reach the White Sphinx early the next morning, and ere the dusk I purposed pushing through the woods that had stopped me on the previous journey. My plan was to go as far as possible that night, and then, building a fire, to sleep in the protection of its glare. Accordingly, as we went along, I gathered any sticks or dried grass I saw, and presently had my arms full of such litter. Thus loaded, our progress was slower than I had anticipated, and besides, Weena was tired, and I began to suffer from sleepiness too, so that it was full night before we reached the wood. Upon the shrubbery hill of its edge, Weena would have stopped, fearing the darkness before us. But a singular sense of pending calamity that should indeed have served me as a warning drove me onward. I had been without sleep for a night and 2 days, and I was feverish and irritable. I felt sleep coming upon me, and the Morlocks with it. While we hesitated among the black bushes behind us, and dim against their blackness, I saw 3 crouching figures. There was scrub and long grass all about us, and I did not feel safe from their insidious approach. The forest, I calculated, was rather less than a mile across. If we could get through it to the bare hillside, there, as it seemed to me, was an altogether safer resting place. I thought that with my matches and my camphor I could contrive to keep my path illuminated through the woods. Yet it was evident that if I was to flourish matches with my hands, I should have to abandon my firewood. So rather reluctantly I put it down. And then it came to my head that I would amaze our friends behind by lighting it. I was to discover the atrocious folly of this proceeding, but it came to my mind as an ingenious move for covering our retreat. Excuse me. I don't know if you have ever thought what a rare thing flame must be in the absence of man, and in a temperate climate. The sun's heat is rarely strong enough to burn, even when it is focused by dewdrops, as is sometimes the case in more tropical districts. Lightning may blast and blacken, but it rarely gives rise to widespread fire. Decaying vegetation may occasionally smother with the heat of its fermentation, but this rarely results in flame. In this decadence, too, the art of fire-making had been forgotten on the earth. The red tons that went licking up my heap of wood were an altogether new and strange thing to Weena. She wanted to run to it and play with it. I believe she would have cast herself into it had I not restrained her. But I caught her up, and in spite of her struggles, plunged boldly before me into the wood. For a little way, the glare of my fire lit the path. Looking back presently, I could see through the crowded stems that from my heap of sticks the blaze had spread to some bushes adjacent, and a curved line of fire was creeping up the grass of the hill. Oh my goodness, he is. That was dumb of him. I laughed at that. Why are you laughing? And turned again to the dark trees before me. It was very black, and Weena clung to me convulsively, but there was still, as my eyes grew accustomed to the darkness, sufficient light for me to avoid the stems. Overhead it was simply black, except where a gap of remote blue sky shone down upon us here and there. I struck none of my matches because I had no hand free. Upon my left arm I carried my little one. In my right hand I had my iron bar. For some way I heard nothing but the crackling twigs under my feet, the faint rustle of the breeze above, and my own breathing, and the throb of the blood vessels in my ears. Then I seemed to know of a pattering about me. I pushed on grimly. The pattering grew more distinct, and then I caught the same queer sound and voices I had heard in the underworld. There were evidently several of the Morlocks, and they were closing in upon me. Indeed, in another minute I felt a tug at my coat, then something at my arm, and Weena shivered violently and became quite still. It was time for a match, but to get one I must put her down. I did so, and as I fumbled with my pocket, a struggle began in the darkness about my knees, perfectly silent on her part, and with the same peculiar cooing sounds from the Morlocks. Soft little hands, too, were creeping over my coat and back, touching even my neck. Then the match scratched and fizzed. I held it flaring, and saw the white backs of the Morlocks in flight amid the trees. I hastily took a lump of camphor from my pocket and prepared to light it as soon as the match should wane. Then I looked at Weena. She was lying clutching my feet and quite motionless with her face to the ground. With a sudden fright I stooped to her. She seemed scarcely to breathe. I lit the block of camphor and flung it to the ground, and as it split and flared up and drove back the Morlocks in the shadows, I knelt down and lifted her. The wood behind seemed full of the stir and murmur of a great company. She seemed to have fainted. I put her carefully upon my shoulder and rose to push on, and then there came a horrible realization. In maneuvering with my matches and Weena, I had turned myself about several times, and now I had not the faintest idea in what direction lay my path. For all I knew, I might be facing back towards the Palace of Green Porcelain. I found myself in a cold sweat, and I had to think rapidly what to do. I determined to build a fire and encamp where we were. I put Weena, still motionless, down upon a turfy bowl, and very hastily, as my first lump of camphor waned, I began collecting sticks and leaves. Here and there, out of the darkness round me, the Morlock's eyes shone like carbuncles. The camphor flickered and went out. I lit a match, and as I did so, two white forms that had been approaching Weena dashed hastily away. One was so blinded by the light that he came straight for me, and I felt his bones grind under the blow of my fist. He gave a whoop of dismay and staggered a little way and fell down. I lit another piece of camphor and went on gathering my bonfire. Presently I noticed how dry was some of the foliage above me, for since my arrival on the time machine, a matter of a week, no rain had fallen. So instead of casting about among the trees for fallen twigs, I began leaping up and dragging down branches. Very soon I had a choking, smoky fire of green wood and dry sticks, and could economize my camphor If you ever, yeah, if you have ever made a fire and lit green wood, it is always smoky. You usually want a drier wood for a campfire than what he's doing. Then I turned to where Weena lay beside my iron mace. I tried what I could to revive her, but she lay like one dead. I could not even satisfy myself whether or not she breathed. Excuse me. Now the smoke of the fire bent towards me. It must have made me heavy of a sudden. Moreover, the vapor of camphor was in the air. My fire would not need replenishing for an hour or so. I felt very weary after my exertion and sat down. The wood, too, was full of slumberous murmur that I did not understand. I seemed just to nod and open my eyes, but all was dark, and the Morlocks had their hands upon me. Flinging off their clinging fingers, I hastily felt in my pocket for the matchbox, and it had gone. Then they gripped and closed with me again. In a moment, I knew what had happened. I had slept, and my fire had gone out, and the bitterness of death came over my soul. The forest seemed full of the smell of burning wood. I was caught by the neck, by the hair, by the arms, and pulled down. It was it was indescribably horrible in the darkness to feel all these soft creatures heaped upon me. I felt as if I was in a monstrous spider's web. I was overpowered and went down. I felt little teeth nipping at my neck. I rolled over, and as I did so, my hand came against my iron lever. It gave me strength. I struggled up, shaking the human rats from me, and holding the bars short, I thrust where I judged their faces might be. I could feel the succulent giving of flesh and bone under my blows, and for a moment I was free. He is a very violent man. The strange exaltation that so often seems to accompany hard fighting came upon me. Drink. I knew that both I and Weena were lost, but I determined to make the Morlocks pay for their meat. I stood with my back to a tree, swinging the iron bar before me. The whole wood was full of the stirring cries of them. A minute passed. Their voices seemed to rise to a higher pitch of excitement, and their movements grew faster. Yet none came within reach. I stood glaring at the blackness. Then suddenly came hope. What if the Morlocks were afraid? And close on the heels of that came a strange thing. The darkness seemed to grow luminous. Very dimly I began to see the Morlocks about me, 3 battered at my feet, and then I recognized with incredulous surprise that the others were running in an incessant stream, as it seemed, from behind me, and away through the wood in front. And their backs seemed no longer white, but reddish. As I stood agape, I saw a little red spark go drifting across a gap of starlight between the branches and vanished. And at that I understood the smell of burning wood, the slumberous murmur that was growing now into a gusty roar, the red glow, and the Morlock's flight. Oh, wonderful job there, time traveler. Wonderful job messing up the future. Stepping out from behind my tree and looking back, I saw through the black pillars of the nearer trees the flames of the burning forest. It was my first fire coming after me. With that I looked for Weena, but she was gone. The hissing and crackling behind me, the explosive thud at each fresh tree burst into flame, left little time for reflection. My iron bars still gripped, I followed in the Morlock's path. It was a close race. Once the flames crept forward so swiftly on my right as I ran that I was outflanked and had to strike off to the left, But at last I emerged upon a small open space, and as I did so, a Morlock came blundering toward me and passed me and went on straight into the fire. And now I was to see the most weird and horrible thing, I think, of all that I beheld in that future age. This whole space was as bright as day with the reflection of the fire. In the center was a hillock, or tulmus, surmounted by a scorched hawthorn. Beyond this was another arm of the burning forest, with yellow tongues already writhing from it, completely encircling the space with a fence of fire. Upon the hillside were some 30 or 40 Morlocks, dazzled by the light and heat, and blundering hither and thither against each other in their bewilderment. At first I did not realize their blindness, and struck furiously at them with my bar in a frenzy of fear as they approached me, killing one and crippling several more. But when I had watched the gestures of one of them groping under the hawthorn against the red sky and heard their moans, I was assured of their absolute helplessness and misery in the glare, and I struck no more of them. Yet every now and then one would come straight toward me, setting loose a quivering horror that made me quick to elude him. At one time the flames died down somewhat, and I feared the foul creatures would presently be able to see me. I was thinking of beginning the fight by killing some of them before this should happen. But the fire burst out again brightly, and I stayed my hand. I walked about the hill among them and avoided them, looking for some trace of Weena. But Weena was gone. I just his I don't know. It kind of bothers me. His how do I put this? His focus on things is pretty rough. What I don't even know how to what's the word? Oh my goodness, I cannot think of the word. But I don't know. It's just he's blundered into this far future, found out the truth, and he's already destroying, wrecking, killing everything in sight he can get his hands on. Maybe it's best that nobody time travels. I mean, it always seems to end in disaster with these people. As at last I sat down on the summit of the hillock and watched this strange, incredible company of blind things groping to and fro, and making uncanny noises to each other as the glare of the fire beat on them. The coiling uprush of smoke streamed across the sky, and through the rare tatters of that red canopy, remote as though they belonged to another universe, shone the little stars. 2 or 3 Morlocks came blundering into me, and I drove them off with blows of my fists, trembling as I did so. For the most part of that night I was persuaded it was a nightmare. I bit myself and screamed in a passionate desire to awake. I beat the ground with my hands and got up and sat down again and wandered here and there and again sat down. Then I would fall to rubbing my eyes and calling upon God to let me awake. Thrice I saw Morlocks put their heads down in a kind of agony and rush into the flames. But at last, above the subsiding red of the fire, above the streaming masses of black smoke and the whitening and blackening tree stumps, and the diminishing numbers of these dim creatures, came the white light of day. I searched again for traces of Weena, but there were none. It was plain that they had left her poor little body in the forest. I cannot describe how it relieved me to think that it had escaped the awful fate to which it seemed destined. What? What? Are Are you? As I thought of that, I was almost moved to begin a massacre of the helpless abominations about me, but I contained myself. What is wrong with him? What is wrong with this guy? I mean, seriously. So, so Weena might have died in this fire, but his immediate thought is, "Oh, it's good that she died because she probably avoided having to be turned into food for the Morlocks." It's like she's still dead, and it's your fault. And now he's saying, "Oh, I was thinking of actually killing off all these Morlocks about me," and he doesn't really give a reason. It's like, what is wrong with you? There is something fundamentally wrong with this man. I don't know if it's just that he's gone crazy because of the time travel, or it's just he is absolutely messed up. I don't even know what to make of this guy. Ugh. The hillock, as I have said, was a kind of island in the forest. From its summit I could now make out through a haze of smoke the palace of green porcelain, and from that I could get my bearings for the White Sphinx. And so, leaving the remnant of these damned souls still going hither and thither and moaning, as the day grew clearer, I tied some grass about my feet and limped on across smoking ashes and among black stems that still pulsated internally with fire towards the hiding place of the time machine. I walked slowly, for I was almost exhausted as well as lame, and I felt the intensest wretchedness for the horrible death of little Weena. You were just saying how glad you were that she escaped her fate, and now you feel sorry. It seemed an overwhelming calamity. The calamity you were just talking? Firefly, I don't think he's really had emotions other than anger slash rage, so murder seems on point. Yes, that is true. He came to this. He has spent most of his time in this future being absolutely pissed off. He is so angry about everything. He's angry about the Aloy. He's angry about the Morlocks. He's angry about the fire. He's angry about losing a time machine. He's absolutely angry about everything. I didn't think about that. Good point, Firefly. Firefly, and if he's Victorian, he's repressed. Oh, that's a good. I didn't think about that. He probably has a lot of repressed emotions because of the society he lives in. And he is a gentleman to boot, of course. So he's in a situation where probably all those repressed emotions are just boiling out and exploding at the same time. Now, in this old familiar room, it is more like the sorrow of a dream than an actual loss. But that morning it left me absolutely lonely again. Terribly alone. I began to think of this house of mine, of this fireside, of some of you, and with such thoughts came a longing that was pain. But as I walked over the smoking ashes under the bright morning sky, I made a discovery. In my trouser pocket were still some loose matches. The box must have leaked before it was lost. Okay, so my dear scholars, there are only, let me see, 4 chapters left in this book, and one of the chapters is incredibly short. I'm going to leave it up to you. Should we try and finish this book tonight? Or we can stop at the next chapter and save the last three chapters for next stream. Yulian20 says no extended. What do the rest of you say, my dear scholars? What do you think? Should we extend it for one more stream? So we did have a bit rough start tonight. Um, that was a good question. Firefly, 2 hours. How long it will be? I don't know, honestly. It actually it might be a little bit longer. Because the last bunch of chapters are a little bit long. Only the epilogue is really, really short. That one is. So if we stop at this next chapter, we'll have two long chapters and a one-page epilogue. And if we want, we can do a discussion afterwards on it. Okay, so we'll make this next chapter the last one then. And then we will do the other chapters next time. And then we'll have a discussion. We'll have a roundtable discussion, my dear scholars. Okay, so we'll get another drink of water. Chapter 10. About 8 or 9 in the morning, I came to the same seat of yellow metal from which I had viewed the world upon the evening of my arrival. I thought of my hasty conclusions upon that evening, and could not refrain from laughing bitterly at my confidence. Here was the same beautiful scene, the same abundant foliage, the same splendid palaces and magnificent ruins, the same silver river running between its fertile banks, the gay robes of the beautiful people moving hither and thither among the trees. Some were bathing in exactly the same place where I had saved Weena, and that suddenly gave me a keen stab of pain. And like blots upon the landscape rose the cupolas above the ways to the underworld. I understood now what all the beauty of the overworld people covered. Very pleasant was their day, as pleasant as the day of the cattle in the field. Like the cattle, they knew of no enemies, and provided against no needs, and their end was the same. I grieved to think how brief the dream of the human intellect had been. It had committed suicide. It had set itself steadfastly towards comfort and ease, a balanced society with security and permanency as its watchword. It had attained its hopes to come to this at last. Once life and property must have reached almost absolute safety. The rich had been assured of his wealth and comfort, the toiler assured of his life and work. No doubt in that perfect world there had been no unemployed problem, no social question left unsolved, and a great quiet had followed. It is a late law of nature we overlook, that intellectual versatility in the compensation for change, danger, and trouble. An animal perfectly in harmony with its environment is a perfect mechanism. Nature never appeals to intelligence until habit and instinct are useless. There is no intelligence where there is no change, and no need of change. Only those animals partake of intelligence that have to meet a huge variety of needs and dangers. So as I see it, the upper world man had drifted towards his feeble prettiness, and the underworld to mere mechanical industry. But that perfect state had lacked one thing even for mechanical perfection: absolute permanency. Apparently, as time went on, the feeding of the underworld, however was affected, had become disjointed. Mother Necessity, who had been staved off for a few thousand years, came back again, and she began below. The underworld being in contact with machinery, which, however perfect, still needs some little thought outside habit, had probably retained perforce rather more initiative. Initiative. Yeah. Had probably retained perforce rather more initiative, if less of every other human character than the upper. And when other meat failed them, they turned to what old habit had hitherto forbidden. So I say I saw it in my last view of the world of 802,701. It may be as raw as an explanation as mortal wit could invent. It is how the thing shaped itself to me, and as that I give it to you. Oh, so he is admitting that he might be wrong. Excuse me. After the fatigues, excitements, and terrors of the past days, and in spite of my grief, this seat and the tranquil view and the warm sunlight were very pleasant. I was very tired and sleepy, and soon my theorizing passed into dozing. Catching myself at that, I took my own hint, and spreading myself out upon the turf, I had a long and refreshing sleep. I awoke a little before sunsetting. I now felt safe against being caught napping by the Morlocks, and stretching myself, I came on down the hill towards the White Sphinx. Excuse me again. My goodness. Dry air, my dear scholars. I had my crowbar in one hand, and the other hand played with the matches in my pocket. And now came a most unexpected thing. As I approached the pedestal of the Sphinx, I found the bronze valves were open. They had slid down into grooves. At that I stopped short before them, hesitating to enter. Within was a small apartment, and on a raised place in the corner of this was the time machine. I had the small levers in my pocket. So here, after all my elaborate preparations for the siege of the White Sphinx, was a meek surrender. A little bit of a what's the word? Kind of a disappointment, actually, isn't it? I threw my iron bar away, almost sorry not to use it. A sudden thought came into my head as I stooped towards the portal. For once at least, I grasped the mental operations of the Morlocks. Suppressing a strong inclination to laugh, I stepped through the bronze frame and up to the time machine. I was surprised to find it had been carefully oiled and cleaned. I have suspected since that the Morlocks had even partially taken it to pieces while trying in their dim way to grasp its purpose. Now, as I stood and examined it, finding a pleasure in the mere touch of the contrivance, the thing I expected happened. The bronze panel suddenly slid up and struck the frame with a clang. I was in the dark, trapped. So the Morlocks thought. At that I chuckled gleefully. I could already hear their murmuring laughter as they came towards me. Very calmly I tried to strike the match. I had only to fix on the levers and depart them like a ghost. But I had overlooked one thing, little thing. The matches were of that abominable kind that light only on the box. You may imagine how all my calm vanished. The little brutes were close upon me. One touched me. I made a sweeping blow in the dark at them with the levers and began to scramble into the saddle of the machine. Then came one hand upon me and then another. Then I had simply to fight against their persistent fingers for my levers, and at the same time feel for the studs over which these fitted. One, indeed, they almost got away from me. As it slipped from my hand, I had to butt in the dark with my hand. I could hear the Morlock's skull ring to recover it. It was a nearer thing than the fight in the forest, I think, this last scramble. But at last the lever was fitted and pulled over. The clean hand slipped from me. The darkness presently fell from my eyes. I found myself in the same grey light and tumult I have already described. And we will stop there. We'll see where the time traveler goes next time. Um, yeah, I don't think it's been a good time for the time traveler, has it? It feels like, it does feel like a lot of the film versions do make him out a little more heroic than he is here. I get the sense that, and I'm talking about this because I'll talk about it more when we have our little round discussion. He very much fits the idea of the gentleman explorer adventurer, in that he's not actually interested in fixing anything going on. He really isn't, if you notice. His only interest is getting out of there. He doesn't really care about helping out the Eloi, or saving them from the Morlocks, or stopping the Morlocks. He has no interest in it. All he cares about is getting in the time machine and leaving. He does care about Weena, but not. It's kind of a weird situation because he both cares for her and he kind of doesn't. He kind of is willing to move on. He doesn't want to stay and check and see and search for her. Once he thinks she's gone, his immediate thought is his own safety and to leave and to get out of there. 20, he's selfish. He is at his core a selfish person. He's essentially acting like a tourist. A very bad tourist, mind you, but a tourist. His only interest in the future is to see what happens and then get out of there. He doesn't think there is any way to fix or to help them, is what it comes across. He bemoans the fate of humanity and seeing them how they are here, but he never stops and thinks, hey, maybe I can stop the Morlocks or try and teach the Eloi or do something. He's never interested in that. He just wants to get out of there. I could just imagine him just standing there crossing his arms, just going, well, that is a shame. Oh well. It's just he comes across as fairly selfish. He's an adventurer, but his adventures are only how it impacts him, not how it impacts anyone else. And I know we can argue that his immediate thought is to get out of there because he doesn't know if he can get out of there. And if he had access to his time machine right off the start, it probably wouldn't be a problem. But it is interesting that he is not interested at all in helping anyone but himself. He does mention taking Weena with him, but that's it. Outside of that, he is absolutely uninterested in trying to help this happen. He believes in his very Victorian era stance that since this happened, it is permanent. There is nothing that can be made better. all we can do is bemoan what was lost and move on. And it is, again, it comes across as sort of a very, as you said, Julian 20, a very selfish point of view for him to do. And it does make him an interesting, complex character. It makes him someone who really, he's a hero, but only to himself. He really is not, it's an adventure story, but not an adventure story where he is involving himself directly. In a weird way, he is kind of doing a, how would I put this? He's a non-involvement stance in it, which makes it interesting. Anyway, sorry about all the scruff earlier today. But at least we got our reading done for tonight. So this upcoming week, um, so Monday, if everything goes according to plan, we'll be continuing more of Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney. So as you notice, I've been streaming on Mondays. That is going to be a permanent thing. Mondays just seem to work out better for us all. So from now on, I'm going to be streaming Mondays and Thursdays. And Thursday, we will be streaming. What are we streaming? More of the Time Machine. Oh my goodness, I cannot think. Horse, I can't think tonight. We'll be reading more of the Time Machine, and we'll be finishing it up and having a little bit of a round table discussion for fun. So then, my dear scholars, let's see. Who can we raid tonight? Oh, I don't even have my Twitch on, do I? Okay, let's see. Do we want to raid a gaming streamer or a, you know what? You know what? Let's raid. I don't think there's any many readers going on tonight. See if there's anyone new streaming. Oh, who's this? We might have a. Let me take a look at this streamer. Give me 1 second, my dear scholars. We might have a new streamer to. Okay, so how would you like to raid a streamer we haven't raided before? What do you say, my dear scholars? There is a Cider Martin who is reading short stories, it looks like. What do you say? Shall we give them a visit? All right, my dear scholars. All right, my dear scholars. As we leave, I say unto you, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Till we meet each other again at the study. Take care, and I shall see you next time. Till then, farewell and bye-bye.